My name is Rebecca, and I'm 28 years old. I live in a modest apartment in Portland, Oregon, where the rain seems to match my mood more often than not. I work as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, and honestly, my life has always been pretty ordinary. No drama, no excitement, just the steady rhythm of work, coffee shops, and the occasional hike when the weather permits. But everything changed the day my Aunt Margaret died. Aunt Margaret wasn't just any aunt. She was my mother's older sister, and growing up, she was the one person in my family who truly saw me. While my parents were busy managing my 3 older brothers and their endless sports schedules and academic achievements, Aunt Margaret would sweep into our lives like a breath of fresh mountain air. She'd take me on weekend trips to the coast, teach me how to identify birds by their songs, and tell me stories about her youth that made me believe life could be an adventure if you were brave enough to seize it. She never married, never had children of her own. Instead, she poured her energy into her career as a real estate investor and her passion for nature. Her crown jewel was a beautiful lakeside property in the Cascade Mountains, about 2 hours from Portland. It was a 2-acre parcel with an old but charming cabin, a private dock, and the most breathtaking view of the water I'd ever seen. Pine trees surrounded the property like silent guardians, and in the summer, the lake would shimmer under the sun like a sheet of liquid diamonds. I spent countless childhood summers at that cabin. Aunt Margaret would let me swim until my fingers wrinkled, and we'd sit on the dock at sunset, dangling our feet in the cool water while she pointed out constellations. She taught me to fish, though I was terrible at it and always felt sorry for the fish. Those memories were some of the brightest spots of my childhood. When I got the call that she'd passed away, a sudden heart attack at 72, I felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. I was at work, staring at a computer screen full of logo designs for a client who couldn't decide between navy blue and midnight blue. My phone buzzed, and I saw my mother's name flash across the screen. "Rebecca, honey." Her voice was tight, strained. "I have bad news. Margaret passed away this morning." The world seemed to tilt. I remember gripping the edge of my desk, feeling the smooth laminate under my fingertips, grounding myself. "What? How?" "Heart attack. It was quick. She didn't suffer." My mother's voice cracked slightly. "The funeral is on Saturday, 2 o'clock at Riverside Memorial." Saturday, 3 days away. I mumbled something about being there, ended the call, and sat in stunned silence. My coworker Jenna noticed and asked if I was okay. I nodded automatically, but I wasn't okay. A piece of my foundation had just crumbled away. The next few days passed in a blur. I took Friday off work to help with preparations, though my family didn't seem to need much help. My brothers, Michael, Daniel, and Christopher, had all flown in with their families. Suddenly, my parents' house was full of noise. Children running around, my sisters-in-law chatting in the kitchen, everyone discussing logistics and memories I wasn't part of. I felt like a ghost in my own family home. On Saturday morning, I woke up early in my childhood bedroom, which had long since been converted into a guest room with neutral beige walls and furniture that didn't belong to me. I put on the black dress I'd bought specifically for the funeral. Simple, respectful, nothing flashy. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to look presentable, and pulled my dark brown hair into a low bun. The funeral was at 2, but my family planned to leave at noon to help set up and greet early arrivals. I came downstairs at 11:30 ready to go, but the house was already in chaos. My nephew, Tyler, had spilled juice all over his shirt. My brother Michael was arguing with his wife about whether they'd packed enough snacks for the kids. Daniel was on a work call despite it being a Saturday, his voice tense as he paced the backyard. Christopher was trying to load flowers into his SUV, but kept getting distracted by his daughter's questions. My mother was in the kitchen, directing traffic like a conductor before a symphony. "Michael, get Tyler changed." "Sarah, can you grab the photo boards from the garage?" "Christopher, make sure those arrangements don't wilt in the car." "Mom," I said, walking into the kitchen, "should I drive myself, or am I riding with you and Dad?" She looked at me, but her eyes were distant, already thinking about the next task. "Oh, honey, just figure it out. We're all so scattered right now." I nodded and stepped back. I found my father in the living room, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Dad, what car am I taking?" He barely glanced at me. "Your mother's handling all that. Ask her." Back to the kitchen. My mother was now on the phone with the funeral director, confirming flower placements. I waited for her to finish, shifting my weight from foot to foot. When she hung up, I tried again. Mom, which car should I? Rebecca, please, not now. Can't you see I'm overwhelmed? Her voice had an edge to it, stress making her sharp. I backed off, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. This was how it had always been. My brothers were the stars, and I was just there, present but somehow invisible. At 12:15, the caravan began to form. Michael's family piled into his minivan. Daniel and his wife took their sedan. Christopher loaded his SUV with his wife, 2 kids, and half the flower arrangements. My parents got into their car, the one with the photo boards and memory boxes in the back seat. I stood in the driveway, keys in hand, watching them organize themselves. I waited for someone to say, "Rebecca, you're with us," but no one did. "Okay, everyone ready?" My father called out, his voice carrying over the group. "Ready," came the chorus of responses. Engines started, doors slammed, and one by one they pulled out of the driveway. I stood there alone, watching the taillights disappear down the tree-lined street. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. A neighbor was raking their yard, the scrape of metal tines against concrete the only sound besides my own breathing. They forgot me. My own family forgot me at my aunt's funeral. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes. Part of me wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a hollow numbness spreading through my chest. This wasn't new. This was just more obvious than usual. I got into my old Honda Civic, started the engine, and began the drive to Riverside Memorial. The route took me along the Willamette River, where kayakers dotted the water despite the cool temperature. The city gave way to suburbs, which gave way to the semi-rural area where the funeral home sat among rolling hills and scattered oak trees. I arrived at 2:30, half an hour late. The parking lot was full, and I had to park at the far end. As I walked toward the building, I could see through the large windows that the service had already started. My uncle, Aunt Margaret's younger brother, was at the podium, speaking into a microphone. I slipped in through the side door as quietly as possible. The room was packed with people. Apparently, Aunt Margaret had touched more lives than I'd realized. I spotted my family in the front rows, all sitting together, a unified block of dark suits and dresses. There was no empty seat near them. I found a spot in the back row, squeezing in next to an elderly couple I didn't recognize. From here, I could barely see the photos of Aunt Margaret displayed near her closed casket. The flowers, elaborate arrangements of lilies and roses, flanked the front of the room, their perfume heavy in the air. I tried to focus on the eulogies. My uncle spoke about Margaret's business acumen and her generosity. A friend from her book club shared a funny story about Margaret's terrible cooking but excellent wine selection. My brother Michael got up and talked about childhood memories I wasn't part of. Apparently, he and Aunt Margaret had bonded over hiking when he was a teenager, something I'd never known. Each word felt like a reminder that everyone knew a version of Aunt Margaret except the version I knew, the version who braided my hair and let me stay up past bedtime to watch meteor showers, the version who believed I was special even when no one else seemed to notice me. After the service ended, people filed out to the reception area where coffee and small sandwiches were served. I lingered near the back, not quite ready to face my family. Part of me wanted to slip out and drive home, pretend this whole day hadn't happened. But I'd come to honor Aunt Margaret, and I wasn't going to leave without saying goodbye. I approached the casket during a quiet moment when most people were in the reception area. Up close, the flowers smelled sweeter, almost overwhelming. I placed my hand on the smooth wood and closed my eyes. "I'm sorry I was late, Aunt Margaret," I whispered. "They forgot me, but I guess you probably understand that feeling, don't you? Being overlooked." I don't know why I said that. Aunt Margaret had always seemed so confident, so self-assured. But maybe that was the armor she wore to protect herself from being dismissed. "Miss, are you Rebecca?" I turned to find a man in his 50s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder. His face was kind, with gentle wrinkles around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "Yes, I'm Rebecca. I'm Thomas Caldwell, your aunt's attorney. I've been looking for you. Could we talk for a moment?" My heart skipped. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all. But your aunt left specific instructions regarding her will, and you're mentioned prominently. We're reading it tomorrow morning at my office. 10 a.m. Your family has already been notified." I nodded, confused. "Okay, I'll be there." He handed me a business card. The address is on here. I'm sorry for your loss. Margaret spoke of you often. He walked away before I could ask what he meant. Margaret spoke of me often? To her lawyer? I pocketed the card and made my way to the reception area. My family was clustered together near the coffee station, talking in low voices. When I approached, my mother looked up and her face registered surprise. Rebecca, when did you get here? During the service, I sat in the back. My father frowned. Why didn't you sit with us? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. There wasn't room. You all left without me. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Rebecca, it was so chaotic and we just assumed it's fine. I cut her off, even though it wasn't fine. I made it. Michael came over, looking sheepish. Becca, I'm sorry. We should have made sure you had a ride. Like I said, it's fine. I forced a smile. I need to head out anyway. I have work tomorrow. That was a lie. I'd taken Monday off too, but I couldn't stand there and accept their half-hearted apologies when we all knew this was just a symptom of a bigger pattern. Wait, my mother said. The lawyer said something about a will reading tomorrow. You'll be there, right? 10 a.m., I'll be there. I left before they could say anything else, walking quickly to my car. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, casting everything in that golden autumn light that makes the world look softer than it really is. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, and finally let myself cry. Not big, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that slid down my cheeks and dripped onto my black dress. I cried for Aunt Margaret, for the relationship we'd had, for the fact that she was gone. But I also cried for myself, for the girl who'd always been forgotten, overlooked, treated like an afterthought in her own family. When the tears finally stopped, I started the engine and drove back to Portland. The highway was relatively empty, and I let my mind wander. What could Aunt Margaret have left me? She wasn't wealthy by any means, though she'd done well for herself. Maybe a small inheritance? Some of her jewelry? I thought about the lake property and felt a pang of longing. That place represented everything I'd loved about my aunt. Her independence, her connection to nature, her ability to create a sanctuary away from the noise of the world. But I was sure she'd probably left it to someone more deserving, someone who'd stayed closer to her in recent years. The truth was, I'd only visited Aunt Margaret a handful of times in the past decade. Life got busy, work, relationships that went nowhere, the endless cycle of trying to build a life that felt meaningful. I'd called her on holidays and her birthday, but the visits had become rare. Guilt gnawed at me as I drove. I should have made more time. I should have gone to the lake more often. I should have told her how much those childhood summers meant to me, but I couldn't change the past. All I could do was show up tomorrow and hear whatever message she'd left behind. I spent Sunday evening in my apartment, which suddenly felt even smaller and more cramped than usual. The walls were a generic off-white, decorated with a few framed prints I'd bought at IKEA. My furniture was mismatched: a couch from a Craigslist find, a coffee table from my college dorm, a bookshelf that leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times I adjusted it. This was my life. Small, contained, unremarkable. I made myself a simple dinner of pasta with marinara sauce and sat on my couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. My mind kept drifting back to the lake, to Aunt Margaret, to the way my family had driven off without me. I fell asleep on the couch and woke at dawn with a crick in my neck. After a quick shower and a strong cup of coffee, I dressed in business casual clothes, gray slacks and a burgundy blouse, and headed to Thomas Caldwell's office. The office was in a historic building downtown, the kind with high ceilings and crown molding that spoke of Portland's earlier days. I took the elevator to the third floor and found the suite marked Caldwell and Associates, Attorneys at Law. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where my family was already gathered. My parents sat together, my mother clutching a tissue. My 3 brothers were spread around the table with their respective wives. Everyone looked somber, dressed in dark colors, their faces showing various degrees of sadness and curiosity. I took the last empty chair at the far end of the table. Thomas Caldwell entered moments later, carrying several folders and a thick document. He nodded to everyone and took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice gentle but professional. "I know this is a difficult time, but Margaret was very clear about her wishes. I'll read the relevant portions of her will, and then we can discuss any questions." He opened the document and began reading. Most of it was standard legal language: debts to be settled, final expenses to be paid from her estate, Then he got to the bequests. To my brother David, I leave my collection of first edition books and the sum of $10,000. My uncle nodded, tears in his eyes. To my nephews Michael, Daniel, and Christopher, I leave $5,000 each to be used as they see fit. My brothers exchanged glances, clearly pleased but trying to remain respectful. To my sister Patricia, I leave my jewelry collection and the sum of $15,000. My mother dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. Thomas paused, then looked directly at me. And to my niece, Rebecca Ann Morrison, I leave the entirety of my real estate holdings, including the 2-acre lakeside property located at 4750 Cascade Lake Road, along with all furnishings, vehicles, and personal effects contained therein. Additionally, I leave Rebecca the sum of $50,000 to be used for property maintenance, improvements, or as she sees fit. The room went silent. I stared at Thomas, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" He smiled slightly. "The lake property is yours, Rebecca. Everything. The land, the cabin, the dock, it's all been transferred to your name. That property is worth at least $400,000, my brother Daniel said, his voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, jealousy. Closer to $450,000 in the current market, Thomas confirmed. Margaret purchased it 30 years ago and watched its value appreciate significantly. She was very strategic in her investments. My mother looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Rebecca, did you know about this?" "Of course not." I felt defensive, though I didn't know why. "I haven't seen Aunt Margaret in months, maybe a year." "Exactly," Christopher said. "So why would she leave you the most valuable asset?" Thomas cleared his throat. "If I may, Margaret included a letter for Rebecca. She asked that it be read aloud to the family." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Aunt Margaret's elegant handwriting. She'd always insisted on writing letters by hand, calling it a lost art. Thomas gestured for me to read it. I swallowed hard and began. "My dearest Rebecca," I read aloud, my voice wavering. "If you're hearing this, then I've finally gone on to whatever comes next. I hope I went peacefully, preferably in my sleep after a good glass of wine and a terrible movie." A few people in the room chuckled softly. "I'm leaving you the lake property because you're the only one who truly loved it the way I did. You're the only one who understood what that place meant, not as an investment or a vacation spot, but as a sanctuary, a place where you could be yourself without apology." My voice cracked, but I continued. "I've watched you grow up, Rebecca, always in the shadow of your brothers, always overlooked by your parents who loved you but didn't know how to see you. I saw you, sweetheart. I always saw you. You have a gentle soul and a quiet strength that this world desperately needs. Don't let anyone make you feel small or insignificant. You matter. Your voice matters. Your dreams matter." Tears were streaming down my face now. "The lake is yours. Make it whatever you need it to be. A retreat, a home, a fresh start. Just promise me you'll actually use it, not just let it sit empty. Promise me you'll sit on that dock at sunset and remember all our conversations. Promise me you'll be brave enough to build a life that makes you happy, not just one that makes others comfortable. With all my love, Aunt Margaret." I folded the letter carefully, unable to look at anyone. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Rebecca, honey, I had no idea Margaret felt that way. About you, I mean. About us." "She wasn't wrong," I said quietly. "I have always been in the shadow." "That's not fair," Michael protested. "We've never tried to overshadow you." I looked at him, really looked at him. "You didn't have to try, it just was. You were the athlete, Daniel was the scholar, Christopher was the musician. I was just there. And yesterday, you all literally forgot me at Aunt Margaret's funeral. You drove away without me?" The guilt on their faces told me they couldn't deny it. My father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, we're sorry. Truly. We got caught up in the chaos and—" "Dad, it's not just yesterday," I interrupted, finding a courage I didn't know I had. "It's been my whole life, and Aunt Margaret knew it. She saw it, and she gave me something I actually needed, a place to belong." Thomas looked around the table. "If there are no legal challenges to the will, we can begin the transfer process immediately. It should take about 2 weeks to finalize everything." No one spoke, They knew that challenging the will would only make them look worse. And besides, Aunt Margaret had been of sound mind, and her wishes were crystal clear. The meeting adjourned shortly after. As people filed out, my mother approached me. "Can we talk? Maybe get coffee?" I shook my head. "Not today, Mom. I need some time to process all this." She nodded, looking hurt but understanding. "Whenever you're ready." I walked out of that building feeling like I was floating. The Portland morning was overcast, typical of November, with a light drizzle beginning to fall. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the rain touch my face, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. 2 weeks later, I received the keys to the lake property. Thomas Caldwell's office had handled all the paperwork with remarkable efficiency, and suddenly, I was the owner of 2 acres of prime Pacific Northwest real estate. The reality of it hadn't quite sunk in yet. Every time I looked at the deed with my name on it, Rebecca Ann Morrison, I felt like I was reading about someone else's life. It was a Friday in late November when I decided to drive up to the property for the first time as its owner. I'd taken the day off work, telling my boss that I needed to handle some estate matters. That was technically true, though it didn't capture the emotional weight of what I was about to do. The drive from Portland took me east through increasingly rural landscape. The city's sprawl gave way to small towns, then to forests of Douglas fir and western red cedar. The highway wound through the foothills of the Cascades, climbing steadily. I passed fruit stands closed for the season, small diners with neon signs, and the occasional gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. As I got closer to Cascade Lake, the trees grew denser and the air felt crisper even through my car's ventilation. The sky was a moody gray, heavy with the threat of rain, but occasional breaks in the clouds let through shafts of pale sunlight that made the wet pavement shimmer. I turned onto Cascade Lake Road, a narrow 2-lane affair that hugged the shoreline. The lake appeared through gaps in the trees, vast, dark blue, and utterly still. A few houses dotted the shore, mostly summer places by the look of them, with closed shutters and empty driveways. This wasn't a resort area with marinas and restaurants. It was quiet, remote, the kind of place people came to escape. The mailbox marked 4750 was tilted slightly, weathered by years of mountain winters. I turned into the gravel driveway, my heart pounding. The driveway curved through thick pines and then suddenly opened up into a clearing. There it was. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered, yet somehow different. It was a classic A-frame structure with cedar siding that had weathered to a beautiful silver gray. Large windows faced the lake, promising spectacular views from inside. The roof was steeply pitched to handle snow loads, and a stone chimney rose from the center. A wraparound porch, its wood slightly worn, offered space for chairs and quiet mornings. I parked next to Aunt Margaret's old Subaru Outback, forest green, reliable, probably 10 years old at least. Another thing she'd left me, along with everything else. I got out of my car, and the silence hit me first. No traffic noise, no sirens, no city sounds. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a bird I couldn't identify. The air smelled of damp earth and evergreen, clean and sharp in my lungs. Walking toward the cabin, I noticed signs of Aunt Margaret everywhere. A wind chime hung near the door, its copper tubes dark with patina. A ceramic planter, empty now, awaiting spring, sat on the porch railing. The welcome mat had a silly joke about drinking wine past 5 o'clock. I unlocked the front door with hands that trembled slightly. The key turned smoothly, and the door swung open with a creak that spoke of hinges needing oil. Stepping inside was like stepping back in time. The interior was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits. The main room was open concept, with the living area, dining space, and kitchen all flowing together under the high A-frame ceiling. Exposed beams gave the space character, and the massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth showing the blackened evidence of countless fires. The furniture was comfortable and lived in. A couch and 2 armchairs, all upholstered in earthy browns and greens, faced the fireplace. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with paperbacks, nature guides, and photo albums. The dining table was solid pine, with 6 mismatched chairs that somehow worked together. The kitchen was small but functional, with butcher block countertops and vintage appliances that were probably older than me. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, and the air had that musty smell of a place that hadn't been opened in a while. But underneath the neglect, I could feel Aunt Margaret's presence. This had been her haven. I walked through the space slowly, touching things. A throw blanket draped over the couch. I remembered that blanket, remembered curling up in it on rainy afternoons. A collection of coffee mugs hanging under the cabinet, each one from a different place she'd traveled. A bulletin board in the kitchen still had postcards pinned to it, showing beaches and mountains and cities I'd never visited. French doors at the back of the main room led to a deck that overlooked the lake. I opened them and stepped outside, and the view literally took my breath away. The deck was generous, built from the same weathered cedar as the cabin exterior. It stretched about 20 feet wide and extended out over the natural slope, held up by sturdy posts. Below the deck, a path led down through native grasses and wildflowers, dormant now in late November, to the private dock. But it was the lake itself that captured my attention. From this elevated position, I could see for miles. The water was a deep slate blue, reflecting the clouds above. The far shore was a solid wall of evergreen forest, rising into foothills that disappeared into low-hanging mist. The mountains beyond were invisible today, hidden in clouds, but I knew they were there, snow-capped peaks that would reveal themselves on clear days. The dock extended about 30 feet into the water. It was simple construction, just weathered planks on pilings, but it looked solid. An old metal canoe was tied up at the end, bobbing gently in the minimal wake. I stood there for I don't know how long, just breathing, just being. A light rain began to fall, more mist than drops, and I lifted my face to it. The temperature was probably in the mid-40s, cool, but not uncomfortable with my jacket on. This was mine, all of this. It didn't feel real. I went back inside and began exploring more thoroughly. Off the main room, a hallway led to the bedrooms. The master bedroom, Aunt Margaret's room, was modest. A queen bed with a faded quilt, a dresser, a bedside table with a reading lamp, and a stack of books. The window looked out at the forest, showing a small clearing where bird feeders hung empty. The second bedroom was smaller, with 2 twin beds. I recognized this as the room I'd slept in during my visits. The quilts on the beds were different. Aunt Margaret must have updated them, but the small desk by the window was the same. I'd sat at that desk coloring and later, as a teenager, writing terrible poetry and dreaming about a life different from the one I had. The bathroom was dated, but charming, with vintage pink tiles and a clawfoot tub. Everything was clean, if dusty. Aunt Margaret had always been fastidious about maintenance, even as she'd gotten older. I found the utility room with its propane water heater and circuit breaker box. Everything looked functional, though I'd need to hire someone to check it all out properly. The cabin ran on well water and propane, with electricity from the grid. Septic system handled waste. It was self-sufficient in the way that rural properties had to be. Back in the main room, I opened the photo albums on the bookshelves. Picture after picture of Aunt Margaret at different ages, young and vibrant in the 70s, middle-aged and confident in the 90s, older but still energetic in more recent years. There were photos of family gatherings where I recognized my parents and brothers, always in group shots at holidays. Then I found an album that was just pictures of me as a child, gap-toothed and grinning on the dock, me as a gangly preteen, holding up a fish, one of the few I'd actually caught, me as a teenager, looking awkward and uncomfortable in my own skin, me as a young adult, just a few years ago, sitting on this very deck with a cup of coffee, looking pensively at the lake. I didn't remember Aunt Margaret taking that last photo, but there it was, and written beneath it in her handwriting, Rebecca, finding her way. My throat tightened with emotion. She'd been documenting my visits, treasuring them in a way I hadn't fully appreciated. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. I found supplies under the kitchen sink and got to work dusting, sweeping, wiping down surfaces. It was therapeutic, this physical labor, transforming the space from abandoned to inhabited. I opened all the windows despite the cold to air everything out, and the fresh lake breeze swept through, carrying away months of stale air. By evening, the cabin looked better. Still dusty in corners I couldn't reach, still in need of deep cleaning, but improved. I'd brought groceries with me, not sure if I'd stay overnight, but wanting the option. I put them away in the vintage refrigerator, which hummed to life when I plugged it in, surprisingly still functional. As darkness fell, I built a fire in the fireplace. The wood box beside it still had logs, Aunt Margaret must have had a cord delivered before she died. I crumpled newspaper, dates from last summer I noticed, arranged kindling and lit it. The fire caught slowly, then stronger, and soon I had a respectable blaze going. I made myself simple dinner, just pasta with olive oil and garlic, a salad from pre-washed greens, and ate at the dining table, watching the fire dance. The cabin's warmth spread slowly, fighting against the November cold, seeping through walls that could use better insulation. After dinner, I wrapped myself in that old blanket and sat on the couch, staring at the flames. The only sounds were the fire's crackle, the wind outside, and the occasional settling of the old cabin. No TV, no internet. I'd checked, and there was no Wi-Fi, just an old landline phone that surprisingly still had a dial tone. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt my shoulders relax. The constant tension I carried from work stress, family dynamics, the general anxiety of city life, began to unwind. I thought about Aunt Margaret's letter. Promise me you'll actually use it, not just let it sit empty. What would it mean to use this place? I couldn't live here full time. My job was in Portland, my apartment, my life such as it was. But maybe I could come here on weekends. Maybe I could make this my retreat, the way Aunt Margaret had. Or maybe, and this thought scared and excited me in equal measure, maybe I could change my whole life. I was 28, and living a life that felt like someone else had chosen it for me. A job I was good at but didn't love. An apartment that was just a place to sleep. Friends I saw occasionally but never felt deeply connected to. No romantic relationship to speak of. My last boyfriend and I had broken up 2 years ago, and I hadn't even tried dating since. What if I could start over? What if this property wasn't just an inheritance, but an opportunity? The thoughts swirled as I watched the fire burn down to embers. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. I hadn't planned to stay the night, but the idea of driving back to Portland in the dark on unfamiliar mountain roads didn't appeal to me. I made up the master bedroom with fresh sheets I'd brought. It felt wrong somehow to sleep in Aunt Margaret's bed without changing the linens first. The mattress was comfortable, the quilts heavy and warm. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind outside and the old cabin's creaks and groans. This was mine. This sanctuary was mine. I fell asleep with tears on my cheeks, but for once, they weren't tears of sadness. The next morning, I woke to watery sunlight filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, forgetting where I was. Then it all came back. The cabin, the lake, the inheritance. I got up and padded to the kitchen in my socks, the wood floor cold under my feet. I made coffee using Aunt Margaret's old percolator, which took some figuring out, but eventually produced a strong, slightly bitter brew that was perfect. Carrying my mug, I went out onto the deck. The morning was clear. The storm clouds of yesterday had passed. The lake was like glass, perfectly reflecting the sky and mountains. And there, finally visible, were the snow-capped peaks of the Cascades, majestic and eternal. A bald eagle soared overhead, and I watched its flight path until it disappeared over the tree line. Somewhere a woodpecker hammered away at a tree. The sun was warming the deck, and steam rose from my coffee cup in the cool air. I could do this, I thought. I could make a life here, but there were practical considerations. I'd need to winterize the cabin properly if I was going to use it regularly in cold months. The place needed repairs. I'd noticed loose boards on the deck, windows that didn't seal quite right, gutters that were probably clogged with pine needles, and I'd need to figure out what to do with my life in Portland. I spent the morning exploring the property more thoroughly. I walked down to the dock and tested its stability. It seemed solid enough, but could probably use some reinforcement. The canoe looked seaworthy after some cleaning. There was a small shed near the house containing tools, fishing gear, life jackets, and other outdoor equipment. Everything was organized with Aunt Margaret's characteristic precision. The 2 acres extended back into the forest, following the natural topography. I found overgrown hiking trails that Aunt Margaret must have created over the years. There was a fire pit in a clearing, surrounded by log benches. Further back, almost at the property line, I discovered a small structure I'd forgotten about. A tiny art studio, no bigger than a large shed, with windows on 3 sides. The door was unlocked, and inside I found an easel, paints, canvases, and brushes. Aunt Margaret had painted. I hadn't known that. The canvases showed landscapes mostly. Lake scenes, mountain vistas, forest interiors. They were good, though clearly the work of an enthusiastic amateur rather than a professional. But they showed something I recognized from my own creative work, the desire to capture beauty, to make sense of the world through art. I sat in the studio for a while, imagining Aunt Margaret here, painting, finding peace in the act of creation. Is this what she'd wanted for me? A place where I could create, where I could be fully myself? By afternoon, I knew I needed to head back to Portland. I had work Monday, responsibilities, a life to handle, but leaving felt harder than I'd expected. As I locked up the cabin, I made a promise to myself and to Aunt Margaret that I'd come back soon. This wouldn't be a place I visited once and then neglected. This would be part of my life now. The drive back to the city felt like returning to a different world. As the trees thinned and the buildings grew denser, I felt that familiar tension creeping back into my shoulders. By the time I reached my apartment building, a nondescript structure in a neighborhood that was trying hard to be trendy, I felt like the peace of the lake was already a distant memory. But it wasn't. Not really. Because now I knew I had somewhere to go, somewhere that was truly mine. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a pattern. I'd work my regular job Monday through Friday, then drive up to the lake Friday evening and return Sunday night. Each trip, I brought more supplies, did more cleaning, made more repairs. I hired a local handyman named George, a weathered man in his 60s who'd lived in the area his whole life, to help with the bigger projects. He fixed the loose deck boards, cleaned the gutters, inspected the roof, and declared the cabin structurally sound, but in need of TLC. "Your aunt was a good woman," George told me while replacing a rotten window frame. Kept to herself mostly, but always had a kind word. She'd hire me to do odd jobs even when she could have done them herself, just to help me out, especially after my wife passed. "I didn't know that," I said, holding the window frame steady while he worked. "She didn't advertise her kindness, just lived it." He paused, measuring twice before cutting. "She talked about you, you know. Her niece, who was going to do great things once she figured out what she wanted." His words settled over me like a blanket. Did she really say that? Every time I saw her, "My niece, Rebecca," she'd say, "she's got a good heart and a sharp mind. She just needs to trust herself." George secured the frame with expert precision. "Guess she trusted you enough to leave you this place." I found myself getting emotional and turned away, pretending to examine the deck railing. "I'm trying to honor that trust. From what I can see, you're doing just fine." December arrived with its characteristic Pacific Northwest gloom. In Portland, the rain was constant, and the city felt gray and heavy. At the lake, though, the rain transformed everything into a different kind of beauty. The trees dripped with moisture, the lake's surface danced with raindrops, and the mountains emerged from mist like mysterious giants. I'd started bringing my work laptop to the cabin, testing whether I could function remotely. My job as a graphic designer was theoretically doable from anywhere with internet. The problem was, the cabin didn't have reliable internet, just that old landline and spotty cell service. During one of my weekend visits in mid-December, I called an internet provider and arranged for service. It would take a few weeks to install, the technician warned, because of the rural location. But it was possible. That single phone call felt momentous, like I was committing to something bigger than weekend visits. I hadn't told my family about my increasing attachment to the lake property. After the will reading, we'd had minimal contact. My mother had called a few times, trying to arrange a family dinner to clear the air, but I'd dodged the invitations. I wasn't ready. I was still processing the revelation that Aunt Margaret had seen what my own parents seemed blind to, that I'd been overlooked, undervalued, treated as an afterthought. But I wasn't bitter. At least, I was trying not to be. What I felt was more like liberation. For the first time, I had something that was entirely mine, something I didn't have to share or compromise on. One Saturday in mid-December, I was at the cabin organizing the art studio when I heard a vehicle in the driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. George had finished his repairs the week before. Curious and slightly nervous, I walked around to the front of the cabin. A pickup truck had parked next to my Honda, and a woman around my age was getting out. She had long blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, wore jeans and a practical rain jacket, and had the kind of easy confidence I'd always envied in others. "Hi," she called out, waving. "You must be Rebecca. I'm Sarah Thornton. I live about a quarter mile down the road." She pointed vaguely back toward the main road. "Oh, hi," I said, surprised. "I didn't know there were neighbors close by." Not many of us year-round residents up here. Most of these places are summer homes. She walked closer, extending her hand. I wanted to introduce myself and say I'm sorry about Margaret. She was a wonderful person. We shook hands, and her grip was firm and warm. Thank you. Did you know her well? Pretty well. She'd invite me over for tea sometimes, and we'd talk about books and birds. She taught me how to identify half the species around here. Sarah's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. She mentioned you sometimes, said you were her favorite person. My throat tightened. She was pretty special to me too. Listen, I don't want to intrude, but I wanted to bring you this. Sarah went back to her truck and retrieved a casserole dish. It's lasagna, homemade. I figured you might be spending time up here and might appreciate not having to cook. The gesture was so unexpected and kind that I felt tears prick my eyes. That's incredibly thoughtful. Would you like to come in? I just made coffee. I'd love that. We sat in the cabin's main room, drinking coffee and talking. Sarah, I learned, was a wildlife biologist who worked remotely doing data analysis for the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife. She'd bought her property 5 years ago, drawn by the same qualities that had attracted Aunt Margaret: the solitude, the natural beauty, the sense of being removed from the chaos of modern life. It's not for everyone, Sarah said, cradling her mug. The isolation can get heavy, especially in winter. But for me, it's perfect. I've got my work, my dog, he's home today, otherwise I'd have brought him, and the whole forest as my backyard. It sounds ideal, I admitted. I've been coming up on weekends, and I'm considering, well, I'm not sure what I'm considering exactly, but I'm thinking about spending more time here. Are you going to move up permanently? I don't know if I can. My job is in Portland. Is it a job you love? The question was so direct it caught me off guard. It's fine. It pays the bills. I'm good at it. That's not what I asked. Sarah's eyes were kind but perceptive. Margaret told me you were creative, that you had this artistic soul, but you'd gotten stuck in a practical life that didn't quite fit. She said that? She worried about you. Not in a pitying way, in a, I see potential that's not being realized way. Sarah set down her mug. Look, I don't know you well enough to give advice, but I can tell you what I did. I had a regular job in Seattle, working in an office, doing work that was fine but not fulfilling, and I was miserable. When the remote work opportunity came up, I jumped at it, bought my place up here, never looked back. Don't you miss the city? Friends, restaurants, culture? Sometimes, she admitted, but Portland's only 2 hours away. I can do city things when I need to. And the trade-off, waking up to this every day, living on my own terms, it's worth it for me. We talked for another hour, and by the time Sarah left, I felt like I'd made a genuine friend. She gave me her number and told me to call any time, for anything. Neighbors look out for each other up here, she said. That's how it works in places like this. After she left, I ate some of the lasagna. It was delicious, and thought about our conversation. Could I actually do it? Could I move up here permanently? The barriers seemed numerous. My job required in-person meetings sometimes, though COVID had proven that remote work was viable. My apartment lease ran through May, though I could probably sublet if needed. My family was in Portland, though given our current relationship status, that felt more like an excuse than a real obstacle. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of making a big change, scared of leaving the safe if unsatisfying life I'd built, scared of failing at something that mattered to me. But I was also tired. Tired of feeling invisible, tired of living small, tired of not taking chances. That night, I sat down with a notebook and made lists, pros and cons, practical considerations, emotional factors. The physical act of writing helped clarify my thinking. By the end of the evening, I'd made a decision. I'd talked to my boss about going fully remote. If that wasn't possible, I'd start looking for freelance work or remote positions with other companies. I'd spend the holidays testing whether I could actually handle extended time at the cabin, including dealing with winter conditions. If January confirmed what I suspected, that this place made me happier than any alternative, I'd commit to the move. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Christmas approached, and with it came the inevitable family obligations. My mother had been persistent about getting everyone together, and I'd finally agreed to attend Christmas dinner at my parents' house. I'd been avoiding them since the will reading, using work and the property as excuses, but I couldn't dodge them forever. The gathering was at my parents' house on Christmas Eve. I drove to Portland that morning from the cabin, feeling the familiar transition from peace to tension as I merged onto the highway. When I arrived, the house was already full. My brothers and their families had arrived earlier, and the noise level was predictably chaotic. Children ran through the living room, my sisters-in-law were helping in the kitchen, and my brothers were in the den watching a football game. "Rebecca!" My mother enveloped me in a hug the moment I walked in. "I'm so glad you came. We've missed you." "It's only been a few weeks, Mom." "It feels longer." She held me at arm's length, studying my face. "You look different. Rested, maybe." "I've been spending time at the lake." "How is the property? Are you taking care of it?" There was something in her tone, not quite disapproval, but something close to it, like she thought I might be squandering what I'd been given. "It's great. I've been doing repairs, cleaning, making it livable for more than just summer." I kept my voice neutral. "That's good. It's a lot of responsibility, though. Your father and I were talking, and if you ever want to sell it, to simplify your life." "I'm not selling it," I said firmly. My mother blinked, taken aback by my tone. "I'm just saying, if you wanted help managing it, or if the financial burden—" "Mom, I'm keeping it. It's not a burden. It's a gift." Before she could respond, my father called from the den, "Rebecca, come say hi to everyone." I excused myself and went to greet my brothers. They were cordial, but distant, as if not quite sure how to relate to me now that I owned something they'd expected to share. Christopher, the youngest, was the only one who seemed genuinely curious. "So what's it like, having the lake place all to yourself?" he asked during a lull in the game. "Amazing," I said honestly. "Peaceful. It's helping me figure some things out." "Like what?" "Like what I want my life to look like." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's cool. I've always envied people who can do that kind of self-reflection. I feel like I just got swept along into adult life, college, job, marriage, kids, without ever stopping to ask if it's what I wanted." His honesty surprised me. Christopher had always seemed the most content of my brothers, the one who'd found his path early and stuck to it. "Is it what you wanted?" I asked gently. "Mostly. I love my wife and kids, but sometimes I wonder about the roads not taken. He shrugged. "Anyway, I'm glad you got the cabin. Aunt Margaret was right to give it to you. You were always her favorite. Did that bother you?" "Nah, I had my own grandparents who spoiled me. Everyone needs someone who sees them as special." His words stayed with me through dinner. The meal itself was the usual production. Too much food, competing conversations, children who didn't want to sit still. I found myself observing it all from a slight distance, like I was watching a play I was no longer acting in. After dinner, while others were having dessert, I slipped out to the back patio. The December evening was cold and damp, and I wrapped my coat tighter. The yard looked different from when I was a child, smaller somehow, less magical. The swing set was gone, replaced by a tasteful patio set. The garden where my mother once grew tomatoes was now professionally landscaped. The door opened behind me, and Michael stepped out. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah, just needed some air." He joined me at the railing. We stood in silence for a moment, our breath visible in the cold air. "Listen," he finally said. "I wanted to apologize for the funeral, for everything, I guess. We haven't been great siblings to you." I looked at him, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "Christopher and I were talking, and Dad made a comment about how you've been distant, and Christopher called him out. Said we've always been distant with you, that we treated you like an afterthought." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "He wasn't wrong. It wasn't intentional," I said, trying to be generous. "No, but that doesn't make it okay. You're our sister, and we barely know you. I couldn't tell you your favorite movie or what you do for fun, or what your dreams are." He looked genuinely distressed. And then Aunt Margaret's letter basically spelled out everything we'd failed to see, and it's been eating at me. I felt my defensive walls starting to crack. "I appreciate you saying that. Are you going to move up to the lake permanently?" "How did you—" "Mom mentioned you've been there every weekend, and I saw the research on your phone when you put it down earlier. Articles about living off-grid, winterizing cabins, remote work." He smiled slightly. "I'm a lawyer, remember? I noticed details." "I'm thinking about it," I admitted. "Probably after the holidays. My job might let me go remote, and if not, I'll figure something else out." "That's brave. Scary, but brave." He paused. "Would you be open to visitors sometime? I'd like to see the place, spend some actual time with you, get to know my sister." The offer was so unexpected, it brought tears to my eyes. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Good." He squeezed my shoulder awkwardly, then headed back inside. I stayed outside a while longer, processing the conversation. Maybe not everything was broken. Maybe there was space for new beginnings in multiple parts of my life. I left the gathering earlier than expected, claiming the long drive back to the lake. My mother looked disappointed, but didn't push. As I drove away from my childhood home, I felt lighter somehow, like a weight I'd been carrying had lifted just a fraction. The drive to the lake in the darkness felt less lonely than it once had. I knew the roads now, knew the turns and landmarks. When I pulled into the cabin's driveway just before midnight, the relief was palpable. I was home. January arrived with snow. The lake region got hit with a storm that dropped nearly 2 feet, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. I was at the cabin when it happened, having decided to spend New Year's there rather than attending the parties some of my Portland friends had invited me to. Watching the snow fall from the warmth of the cabin, a fire crackling in the fireplace, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced in the city. The world was quiet, muffled by the blanket of white. The lake was starting to freeze at the edges, creating delicate patterns of ice. The mountains were invisible behind curtains of falling snow. I'd had the conversation with my boss the week before Christmas. To my surprise, he'd been receptive to the idea of me going fully remote. The company had been discussing expanding their remote work options anyway, and I was reliable enough that he trusted me to handle it. There would be quarterly in-person meetings in Portland that I'd need to attend, but otherwise, I could work from anywhere. The relief I'd felt when he agreed had told me everything I needed to know. This was the right decision. I'd also started exploring other creative outlets. The art studio that Aunt Margaret had built called to me. I wasn't a painter like she'd been, but I started using it as a design studio. I set up my laptop, my drawing tablet, and my reference books. The natural light was perfect, and working there felt inspiring in a way my Portland apartment never had. I'd also taken up some of Aunt Margaret's hobbies. I started birdwatching, using her field guides and binoculars to identify species. The lake attracted all kinds of waterfowl in winter: ducks, geese, even the occasional loon. The forests held chickadees, woodpeckers, and juncos. I started keeping a journal of what I saw, sketching the birds and noting their behaviors. Sarah became a regular visitor and friend. She'd stop by every week or so, usually bringing something: firewood, homemade bread, advice about surviving mountain winters. She taught me how to winterize pipes, how to use the snowblower I discovered in the shed, how to safely build fires in challenging conditions. "You're a natural," she said one afternoon while we were clearing snow from the deck. "Some people never adjust to this kind of life, but you're thriving." "It feels right," I said, leaning on my shovel. "Like this is what I was supposed to be doing all along." Through Sarah, I met other year-round residents. There was Tom, a retired engineer who lived on the other side of the lake and could fix anything. Ellen, a writer in her 60s who'd lived here for 20 years and regaled me with stories of legendary winters. Marcus and David, a couple in their 40s who ran a small organic farm and sold vegetables and eggs to the locals. I was building a community, slowly but surely. These were people who'd chosen this life deliberately, who valued quiet and nature and self-sufficiency. They accepted me without judgment, welcoming me into their small circle of mountain dwellers. By late January, I'd officially moved out of my Portland apartment. I'd sold or donated most of my furniture. I didn't need it, and the cabin was fully furnished. I kept my clothes, my books, my professional equipment, and a few personal items that mattered to me. Everything fit in the Subaru and my Honda in 2 trips. The day I handed over my apartment keys to the landlord felt momentous. I was cutting ties with my old life, committing fully to this new path. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. My family's reaction was mixed. My mother worried I was isolating myself. My father thought I was being impractical. But Michael kept his promise and came to visit one weekend in February, bringing his wife and kids. Watching my nephews run around the property, exploring the snow-covered trails and marveling at the frozen lake, I saw joy I hadn't seen in them before. They were always so scheduled, so busy with activities and school. Here, they could just be kids. "This place is incredible," Michael said as we stood on the deck, watching his sons build a snowman. "I can see why Aunt Margaret loved it." "I understand her better now," I said. "She chose this solitude, this simplicity. It wasn't that she couldn't handle family or society. She just knew what made her happy and had the courage to pursue it. And you're doing the same thing. Trying to. You're succeeding. He looked at me seriously. You seem more yourself than I've ever seen you, like you've finally relaxed into who you actually are. His words meant more than he probably knew. February gave way to March, and with it came the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing green beneath. The lake ice started breaking up, creating haunting sounds as the slabs shifted and cracked. Migratory birds began returning, and I'd spend mornings on the deck with my coffee and binoculars, watching them arrive. I'd established a rhythm to my days. Mornings were for work, client calls, design projects, administrative tasks. I'd set up a proper office in the second bedroom with a dedicated workspace and reliable internet. Afternoons were for maintenance and chores. There was always something to fix, clean, or improve on a property like this. Evenings were my own, reading, cooking, sitting by the fire, or walking the trails. I was healthier than I'd ever been. The physical labor of maintaining the property, combined with daily walks and outdoor activities, had toned my body and cleared my mind. I slept better, ate better, felt better. But more than the physical changes, I felt emotionally settled. The constant low-grade anxiety I'd carried for years, the sense of never quite measuring up, of always being on the outside, had faded. Here, there was no one to compare myself to, no expectations to meet except my own. In late March, I had an unexpected visitor. I was working in the art studio when I heard a car in the driveway. Looking out, I saw a vehicle I didn't recognize. A woman got out, older, maybe early 60s, with silver hair and an elegant bearing. I met her at the cabin's front door. "Can I help you? Are you Rebecca?" She had a kind face with smile lines around her eyes. "I'm Dorothy Chen. I was Margaret's closest friend. I apologize for not reaching out sooner. I've been traveling, and I only just heard about her passing and about you inheriting the property. Please, come in." I welcomed her inside, suddenly self-conscious about the cabin's lived-in state. My laptop on the dining table, dishes in the sink, my boots by the door. But Dorothy looked around with approval. "Oh, you're actually living here. Margaret would be so pleased. She always worried this place would become just another vacant summer home after she was gone." I made tea, and we sat by the fire. Dorothy told me about her friendship with Aunt Margaret. They'd met through a book club 30 years ago and had been close ever since. She lived in Seattle, but had visited the cabin many times over the years. "Margaret talked about you constantly," Dorothy said, warming her hands on her mug. "You were her hope for the future, her proof that goodness and gentleness weren't weaknesses." "I wish I'd known her better in her later years," I admitted. "I let life get in the way of visiting." She understood. She'd done the same thing with people she loved when she was your age. That's why she left you this place. She wanted you to have it now, while you could actually use it, not decades from now when you're too old to fully enjoy it. Dorothy reached into her bag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "She asked me to give this to you, if anything happened to her. I was supposed to wait until you'd been here a few months to make sure you were serious about the place." With trembling hands, I unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal, old, well-used, filled with Aunt Margaret's handwriting. "It's her journal from the year she bought this property," Dorothy explained. "She wanted you to read about her own journey of starting over, of choosing a different path. She thought it might help you with your own journey." I opened the journal carefully. The first entry was dated April 1995. "I've done it," Aunt Margaret had written. "I've bought the lake property. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, leaving my job, investing everything in a piece of land I can barely afford. But I know deep in my bones that this is right. I'm 42 years old, and for the first time, I'm choosing my own life instead of living the one others expect of me." I looked up at Dorothy, tears in my eyes. She was 42 when she started over? "It's never too late to choose differently," Dorothy said gently. "And you're way ahead of her. You're only 28. You have so much time to build whatever life you want." After Dorothy left, with promises to visit again and invitations for me to come to Seattle, I spent the evening reading Aunt Margaret's journal. Entry after entry chronicled her doubts, her fears, her small victories. She'd struggled with the isolation at first, questioned her decision repeatedly, nearly given up and sold the property multiple times in that first year. But she'd persevered, and slowly, she'd built a life that sustained her. She'd made friends, found purpose, created a sanctuary, and eventually she'd stopped questioning and started simply living. One entry, dated that first autumn, resonated deeply. Today, I sat on the dock at sunset and realized I haven't thought about my old life in weeks. I'm not running from anything anymore. I'm running toward something, toward peace, toward authenticity, toward becoming the person I was always meant to be. This is what freedom feels like. I closed the journal and looked around the cabin, my cabin now. The fire had burned down to embers, casting everything in soft orange light. Through the windows, I could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. This was what freedom felt like. Spring fully arrived in April, transforming the landscape. The forest exploded with green as the trees leafed out. Wildflowers appeared, trilliums, wild roses, lupines. The lake warmed enough for swimming, though it was still bracingly cold. I'd taken up kayaking, using Aunt Margaret's old canoe and a kayak I bought from Tom. I'd spend afternoons paddling around the lake, exploring coves and inlets I'd never seen before. The water was clearest I'd ever seen it, and I could look down and see fish darting through the depths. My work was going well. I'd picked up several new clients, drawn by my portfolio and reliability. The remote arrangement was working perfectly. I was more productive here than I'd ever been in an office setting. The combination of focused work time and abundant breaks in nature created an ideal balance. I'd also started a small side business, designing marketing materials for local businesses in the nearby towns. Sarah had connected me with people who needed logos, websites, brochures. It wasn't lucrative yet, but it was satisfying in a way my corporate work wasn't. I was helping real people, seeing the direct impact of my work. One Saturday in May, I hosted a gathering. Sarah, Tom, Ellen, Marcus, and David, all the friends I'd made in my first months at the lake. I grilled burgers, made salads from vegetables Marcus and David had brought, and we sat on the deck late into the evening, talking and laughing. At one point, Ellen raised her glass. A toast to Rebecca, who has truly become one of us. Welcome home. Welcome home, they echoed, and I felt the words settle into my chest, warm and true. Later, after everyone had left, I sat alone on the deck in the darkness. The stars were brilliant, unpolluted by city lights. I could hear the lake lapping gently against the dock, the wind in the pines, an owl calling somewhere in the forest. I thought about the version of myself who'd stood in my parents' driveway last November, watching my family drive away without me. That girl had felt invisible, forgotten, adrift. But she'd also been given an unexpected gift, not just the property, but the push she needed to reimagine her entire life. Aunt Margaret had seen potential in me that I hadn't seen in myself. She'd given me not just a place, but permission to choose differently. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my family chat. I'd been added back after months of silence, though I mostly just observed their messages rather than participating. Tonight, though, I typed a message. Hey everyone. I know it's been a while. I wanted to let you know that I'm doing really well up at the lake. I've officially moved here permanently. If anyone wants to visit, you're always welcome. I'd like to share this place with you, not because I have to, but because I want to. On my terms, when it feels right. I hope we can rebuild our relationship in a healthier way. Love, Rebecca. I hit send before I could second guess myself. Responses started coming in almost immediately. My mother. Oh honey, we'd love to visit. Just tell us when. Daniel. That sounds great, Becca. Proud of you for following your path. Christopher. Can we come fish? The kids have been asking about the lake. Even my father, who rarely texted, sent a simple, we'd like that. You've done good, Rebecca. I smiled, feeling something shift and settle. This wasn't about fixing everything that had been broken. It was about moving forward with clearer boundaries and more honest communication. As June arrived, bringing long days and warm sunshine, I reflected on how much had changed in 7 months. Last November, I'd been a woman living a half-life, going through motions, feeling perpetually invisible. Now I was someone who woke with purpose, who built her days around what mattered to her, who'd created a life aligned with her values. The cabin had become truly mine. I'd painted the kitchen a warm yellow. I'd replaced the worn couch with a more comfortable one from a furniture store in the nearest town. I'd hung my own artwork on the walls, a mixture of my design work and attempts at painting, inspired by Aunt Margaret's studio. The place reflected me now, while still honoring her memory. I'd started a blog documenting my journey, the move to the lake, the challenges of rural living, the unexpected joys of choosing differently. I wrote honestly about the loneliness that sometimes crept in during long winter days, about the financial uncertainties of freelance work, about the moments of doubt when I questioned everything. But I also wrote about the sunrises that took my breath away, about the community that embraced me, about the deep satisfaction of building something with my own hands. The blog had attracted a small but engaged following, other people who were contemplating their own significant life changes, who needed to hear that it was possible. One afternoon, I was working on the dock. I'd decided to rebuild a section that was getting unstable, when I heard footsteps on the path. I looked up to see a young woman, probably early 20s, standing hesitantly at the edge of the clearing. "Hi," she called out. "I'm sorry to intrude. Are you Rebecca?" "I am." I set down my tools and walked over. "Can I help you?" "I'm Emma. I read your blog. I've been following your story since you started writing about moving here." She looked nervous, but determined. "I drove up from California. I'm trying to figure out my own life, and your words really resonated with me. I was hoping I could talk to you for a few minutes. I promise I'm not a stalker or anything weird." I smiled, remembering how lost I'd felt not so long ago. "Come on up to the cabin. I'll make us some lemonade." We sat on the deck, and Emma told me her story. She just graduated college with a degree in marketing, had job offers at prestigious firms in San Francisco and LA, but felt no excitement about any of them. She'd stumbled across my blog while researching alternative lifestyles and had been inspired by my choice to step off the conventional path. "I'm not saying I want to move to a cabin in the woods," she said quickly, "but reading about your journey gave me permission to ask myself what I actually want, not just what I'm supposed to want." And I realized I don't know. I've been so focused on achieving good grades, good internships, good job offers, that I never stopped to think about whether any of it made me happy. "So, what are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know yet, but I turned down the job offers. I'm giving myself the summer to figure it out, maybe do some traveling, try different things. My parents think I'm insane." She laughed, but there was an edge of anxiety to it. "They probably do. But you know what? In 10 years, you won't regret taking time to figure yourself out. You will regret spending years in a life that doesn't fit." We talked for over an hour. I shared my own struggles and uncertainties, the reality behind the inspiring blog posts. I told her about the hard days, the moments of doubt, the ongoing work of building a life that felt authentic. When she finally left, thanking me profusely, I felt a sense of purpose that was new. Maybe this was part of what Aunt Margaret had seen in me, not just someone who needed saving, but someone who could eventually help save others by example. July brought heat and tourists to the lake. The summer homes filled up with families on vacation. The lake buzzed with jet skis and boats during the weekends. The peaceful solitude I'd grown accustomed to was temporarily disrupted, but I'd learned to adapt. I did my work early in the mornings when everything was still quiet. I explored the back trails where tourists didn't venture. And honestly, the energy was fun sometimes. I'd chat with visitors at the small general store a few miles away, hearing about their lives and travels. Michael kept his promise and brought his family for a week in mid-July. Watching my nephews swim in the lake, exactly as I'd done as a child, felt like completing a circle. We had family dinners on the deck, played board games by lamplight, and went on hikes through the forest. One evening, Michael and I took the kayak and canoe out for a sunset paddle. We floated in the middle of the lake, the water like glass around us, the sky turning pink and orange. "Thank you for inviting us," he said. "The kids are going to remember this forever. Hell, I'm going to remember this forever. It's been years since I just stopped. No work emails, no schedule, just being present." "That's what this place does," I said. "It forces you to slow down, to be where you are. Aunt Margaret knew what she was doing, leaving this to you. You've honored it. You've made it live." His words settled over me like a blessing. As summer faded into autumn, my first full cycle of seasons at the lake, I took stock of my life. Financially, I was stable. My combination of corporate clients and local work provided enough income. I'd never be wealthy, but I had enough. The cabin was paid for, my expenses were low, and I'd learned to live simply. Emotionally, I was whole in a way I'd never been. The loneliness I'd feared never materialized, or rather, it appeared sometimes, but it wasn't the devastating isolation I'd anticipated. I had Sarah and the other year-round residents. I had my family, on new and healthier terms. I had my work, which felt meaningful now, and I had myself. which maybe was the most important thing. I'd learned to enjoy my own company, to find satisfaction in small daily rituals, my morning coffee on the deck, the evening walk around the property, the weekly dinner with Sarah where we'd cook together and talk about everything and nothing, the monthly video call with Dorothy, who'd become a mentor and friend. In October, on the anniversary of Aunt Margaret's death, I held a small memorial at the lake. I invited my family, Dorothy, Sarah, and the other locals who'd known her. We gathered around the fire pit, shared memories, and toasted her life. My mother pulled me aside before she left. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for not seeing you, really seeing you, when you were growing up. Margaret did. She saw something we missed, and she gave you the tools to find yourself. I'm grateful to her for that, even though I'm ashamed of my own blindness. Mom, it's okay." "No, it's not okay, but it's in the past and we can't change it. What we can do is be better going forward." She hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of who you've become. You're stronger than any of us realized." After everyone left, I sat alone by the dying fire, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. The stars were emerging, and the lake was settling into its evening calm. I thought about the year that had passed, the grief, the discovery, the transformation. I thought about the girl who'd been forgotten at a funeral, who'd felt invisible her entire life. And I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who knew her own mind, who'd built a life of purpose and peace, who'd learned that being overlooked was sometimes the universe's way of setting you free. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I sometimes journaled. I typed, "Dear Aunt Margaret, it's been a year since I lost you and gained everything. I understand now what you were trying to give me. Not just property, but possibility. You showed me that it's never too late to choose differently, to step off the path others have laid for you and forge your own way. I promise I'm using this place, just like you asked. I'm sitting on the dock at sunset. I'm being brave. I'm building a life that makes me happy. And I'm honoring your memory every single day by refusing to make myself small to fit into spaces that weren't meant for me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for this gift. I miss you, but I also feel you here in the wind, through the pines, and the lapping of the waves. You're part of this place, and now I am too. With love and gratitude, Rebecca." I looked up at the stars and felt at peace. The lake shimmered in the moonlight. The cabin behind me glowed with warm light from the windows, and somewhere in the forest an owl called. This was my sanctuary, my home, my life, chosen, built, and entirely my own. They'd forgotten me at my aunt's funeral, but that moment of being overlooked had led to this, a life richer and more authentic than I'd ever imagined possible. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.